Hey guys, this is Charlotte, Todd Leonard with Strategic Roots Initiative. I'm on my page and I am going to be sharing a vision dream that I had in 2002. And it relates to the 9/11 terrorist attack that we had in 2011. September 11, 2001. I had an experience a year later with the Lord in a vision dream that took place September the 11th, 2002. I was lying on my couch and I got sleepy. I just had a baby girl that past October, so she wasn't quite a year yet. She was just turning, I guess, 11 months or so at the time. But being that age, you know, they keep you up at night. So we were resting on the couch that morning. It was about 9 o'clock. And I had a dream when I fell asleep. When I woke up, it had been just 15 minutes had went by. So just a real short span of time went by. But I want to give you the dream in a synopsis, but you can go and read the full thing. I'll have it here on my page, listed here with the video. But basically, I had a dream about the foundation at 9/11. There was an area there that they had petitioned off, and they were allowing people to go into the petitioned area. That was the ground zero area, and I think they let family members and people that were grieving. Obviously there was a lot of people grieving, and there were a lot of people there, and there was a lot of people watching the program, and I myself was watching the program. And I was watching it. I think it got to the part where the announcer was talking about the wind at 9/11. He began to say, wow, the wind sure does look, it's really breezy here. It's really, really windy here. It's unusually windy. And he made a comment of some type. And so I think it was then that I fell asleep. Well, while I fell asleep, I woke into a dream of me watching the program and listening to the same announcer and watching the same scene as people were down standing at the ground zero area. So as I was watching this in my dream, I was watching this experience with this wind that he had spoken about in real life. You know, he had spoken about in the broadcast. I began to see the wind as God showed it to me. So in the dream, it wasn't just a windy day. The Lord showed me something different. So I was getting to look inside of the backside of what was happening. That was actually happening. I got to see what was going on. So while I was in this dream, I saw the breath of God. And it was like he took his hand and he raised up the earth in the soil there at ground zero. He raised the soil up, and it formed a square building. And the soil in the building, it was just like a building made out of soil. And it was square, and it was there were windows on the front side of the building, like I guess you could think of your eyes being on the front side of your body, you know, your head. So the windows were on the front side of the building, and there was 3 other sides that were solid. I think that's right. And so and the windows were square, and there was no glass in the windows. It was just hollow windows in a hollow building. You didn't see any kind of structure on the inside of this building. This was just a solid wall of soil. It came up all together all at once. And I want to just read a little bit of this. It might be a little bit better than me explaining it to you. Okay, so the camera focused on a person on ground zero before I had the dream, and this guy was taking dirt out of ground zero and putting it in a tin. And then it was then pretty much that I saw the wind gust up, and the announcer mentioned it, and then I fell asleep. And this was the experience that I had while I was asleep. I began to immediately dream. My dream consisted of me watching the memorial service on television. It was the same exact service I was watching on the television. All of a sudden, the announcer began to speak out. With a loud, booming voice, he said, "Oh, God." Then he said, "He's taking them up." I heard the announcer say that he was taking them up, and I heard this over and over and over. The people at ground zero and those in their homes saw this and heard this, just like, you know, I would say like it could be millions and millions of people were witnessing. As I was witnessing it on TV, it just struck me that I'm not the only one watching this thing. There's a lot of people watching this happen, and it was like God was unfolding something right in front of everybody for everybody to see. I saw this and heard this. Millions of people saw the power of God begin to unfold. It was a mighty sign and wonder like nothing the world had ever witnessed before. And it was being broadcasted over live television, because that was a live service that day that we were watching on CNN. As the dream progressed, the next thing I witnessed was the shell of the building rising up from that site. It was a medium brown building. The building was empty. There wasn't a man-made foundation to this building. The foundation of the building was the soil at ground zero, and it was a very, very tall building. It reached to the heavens. You couldn't, you know, begin to understand how tall that is, really. It was really, really tall. It just kept going up and up and up. This building had openings for windows. The openings were square openings. They ran along the front of the building. Let me just pause right here. I wouldn't have remembered all of this if I hadn't have immediately, that evening and the next day, took this all down from my memory. And that's real important, that you've got to remember that when you have experiences like this, to go ahead and write it down, and don't think that you're going to retain it for a number of days and you're going to remember it all, because you're not going to. Because I remembered this specific thing was that the windows ran along the front of the building. Now I could have let this go and remembered, were they along the front of the building? Could they be in the back or the side? Or, see, I remembered they were along the front of the building. There was no glass in the square openings. And to me, this is like your eyes being a window. Yeah, along the front of your body you have your eyes. Then the announcer said again, "He is taking them up." God is taking the people up to heaven himself. When he said this, I saw God's breath blow down around the sides of the building, pulling up all the molecules and particles of humans that were never exhumed from the rubble and couldn't be. He gathered them inside of this brown building. So he created the building, and then he gathered all these people inside that brown building. That's what he did. Let me repeat that again. He gathered them inside of this brown building. So he created the building and he put them in the building. His breath pulled up the soil in such a mighty wind that the presence of God was incredible in that wind. The soil stood straight up like a wall, about 3 foot thick and taller than the building itself. So the building was created and it was rising up, but then the people inside these particles, the remains of these people, being that it was the soil is the remains, is what I mean to say. It was coming out from the center of the building, it was really thick, like 3 foot thick, and it was taller than the building itself, and it rose up from within the building. I watched through the television and began to cry out and weep at how God himself was showing the world his power. Okay, as I was watching this in my dream, I started crying. I remember the soil was the same color as the medium brown building. At the top of the soil were peaks. Now this is really interesting. At the time of 2002, I don't know that I had heard much about the teaching on the 7 mountains. I know I hadn't. I was still raising my children. I had 4 small, had pretty much had, well, I had a baby, and then I had a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, 15-year-old. These peaks were different sizes. Some peaks were taller than others. These peaks pointed towards heaven. When I woke up from the dream, the program was still airing. Only 10 minutes had passed. See, I didn't remember that. Wow, 10 minutes. Okay, so you know how you feel when you take a deep breath? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you know how you feel when you take a deep sleep and when you wake up fast, you don't know where you are? That's the kind of feeling I felt. Well, I woke up watching the program and didn't know that I'd woke up at all. It's hard to explain. I couldn't understand why the people were at Ground Zero so somber. After a minute or two, I realized I was watching the program that was on before I had fallen asleep. Because while I was watching this in my dream, people were screaming and yelling and having a fit. And then when I woke up, it was like, it's quiet. I was like freaked out. I was really freaked out. But I felt the breath of God on me for the rest of the day. That whole day, it was powerful, what I felt that day. Ooh, I was filled with the Holy Ghost. I mean, that's the way it felt. I was revisited by the Holy Ghost in a big way. I couldn't wait to get to church that night. I relayed this experience to a group of people at my church. That was a Wednesday night. That evening, oh, I had the dream, that vision dream that morning, and then that evening, it was Wednesday, I was at church that night, and then and I told them about it. Then I went to church Sunday morning, and it was the 15th. A friend of mine had watched a news program Wednesday night after she got home from our service, and she was like, oh, Charlotte was telling me something about this, and she'd watched that evening service. She said in a letter to me, I'm going to read the letter to you. Charlotte, after church on Wednesday night, I went home and turned on CNN. They were doing a recap of the day's memorial service in New York City, Washington, and in Pennsylvania. When the reporter Bill Hemmer did his lead-in on New York's service, he said something about the wind being so strong there at Ground Zero. Then he said it seemed to him like heaven took a deep breath and then it exhaled over them. You see? I thought that was stunning in the light of the dream you had shared with us Wednesday night. So she gave me this. So she said that he said, and I had forgotten that. I really had forgotten that, and she reminded me, and she brought me a letter and said it was like, he said it was like heaven took a deep breath and then exhaled over them. Now I want to move up. Let's see, now moving up from 2002, we are in 2015. There was a terrorist attack the other day in California. 14 people were killed and many were sent to the hospital. Later that day, I began to receive a revelation. I looked back at my dream vision I had in 2002. I understood the dream now because of what is taking place in the Middle East and other places in the world. Many people are coming to Christ in these last days. In the dream I had, the announcer began to speak and say in a loud voice, "Oh God." I believe this speaks about people crying out to God, many people crying out and calling on the name of the Lord. The next portion of the dream I remember is the announcer saying, He is taking them up to heaven. Now I'm reading this to you because this is 2016 and I felt to take the dream out in 2015.